saw the beef cutting diagram video that we released recently, well, hopefully you saw it. If not, Spencer's gonna put a link in right here where you can go back and check it out. We're gonna duplicate that today, but not with a beef. We're gonna do a lamb. So you can see a lamb behind me. This is the hind, this is the saddle, this is the front. This is a whole lamb. We're gonna lay it out on our table. We're gonna trace it out. We're gonna do the diagram. We're then gonna take all of the cuts and we're gonna put them down inside that diagram. This is gonna be a fantastic visual learning experience for you. People love the beef diagram video we did. We thought we're gonna duplicate it with a lamb. So it should be pretty cool. Something we're gonna do just a little bit different is we're actually gonna lay both halves on the table because I'm gonna process this lamb two different styles. So we're gonna do two halves on our table. First step, we're gonna get this laid on the table and we're gonna get it mapped out. All right, first step, we're just gonna get it laid down on our table and we're gonna go just past center here. We get the tape and let's get it taped out. Our diagrams are drawn out. As you can see, as mentioned, we have two halves because we're gonna cut them two different ways. So let's get the lamb off the table. Let's get it moved over to our processing table and we'll just get started. I'm gonna be doing the cutting. I'm gonna lay stuff over on our prep table and then Scott's gonna be laying it out on our finished lamb diagram, just like we did the beef. So we're gonna start by making a cut right here at the base of the leg in the lamb sirloin. So once we get that cut, grab our handsaw. We'll move over to our bandsaw. So throughout this process, I am going to be putting some trimmings over on our boning table. And then at the end of this video, we'll go through, we'll show you the lamb trimming, and we're also going to be doing an overall yield. So stick around for that. First thing we're going to start with is a couple lamb sirloin chops. Typically get a couple per leg. I'm just going to be stacking the pieces off of one half over here, and then I'm going to be cutting the other half so that we can go back and forth between the two halves. So pay attention and follow along closely. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to remove this shank. So we just cut through that tendon, go up, find that joint. This makes some fantastic lamb shank, some ossobuco. So there's your lamb hind shank, and here's your leg lamb. So one leg I'm going to do whole bone in, just like you see it, and then the other one I'm going to do boneless and rolled and tied. But this one, first leg, is going to stay whole, bone in. That's about a 5 to 6 pound whole bone in leg of lamb. So I want to just knock off the end of this hock on that lamb shank. The bones we will be saving as well, but so there's your very first piece. Now what we're going to do, move our lamb over to our bandsaw. I'm going to take off the neck. With this neck, we're just going to make some neck slices. Just like that. Onto the lamb shoulder. Once we get that shoulder cut off there, we're going to split these in half. I'm going to do one shoulder as roast and one shoulder as chops. First step is to remove this front shank. And there you have a lamb front shank. Now what we want to do is we want to cut a couple roasts. So there's a lamb arm roast. We'll trim that up just a little bit more. And there's a lamb shoulder blade roast. A couple of those lamb shoulders, that's the blade portion, and this is the arm. So I just want to take a little bit of these rib bones off there and just do a little bit of trimming on this. Just a nice lamb arm roast, shoulder arm roast. So there's the blade and there's the arm. Those are your shoulder roasts. Onto that lamb saddle. First step is just to split this in half. I just wanted to make sure that I had this entire half, because between the two I didn't want to get mixed up. So just putting everything back together. Shoulder, leg, saddle. There's a half a lamb right there. So we'll get to that one here in a second. All right, so next step, we want to leave these bones long because we're going to do a French rack. So we start by taking off those little riblets. We want to count over 8 ribs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We want our French rack to be 8 ribs long. This will further process this down into a French rack of lamb. But before we do that, let's cut some lamb loin chops. Want to remove just a little bit of that fat. These are your lamb loin chops. You can see it has that nice piece of that tenderloin in there. So it looks like we got 7 of those loin chops. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less, just kind of depends on the lamb. But next step, let's do this French rack of lamb. Start by peeling this membrane off. We want to take this cover fat and this meat off the top of these ribs. We want to go all the way down to the bone right there. We're going to leave this cap on it, but there is a little thin little bone right here at the end that's from that shoulder blade, so we want to take that off. So once you get that done, so the membrane's peeled, I took the meat off the top of these ribs. You just want to go down through and trim the meat out from in between the ribs. So in one half I'm going to do a French rack, and the other half, the next half, I'm going to do French chops. So the only difference is one will leave whole and the other one will we'll actually cut into chops. Clean these bones up a little bit. Just wrapping up our French rack of lamb. The only thing I have left to do is trim out these sirloins. So a couple sirloins. And then what we'll do is we'll get these, we'll get our bone dust scraper. We'll get these all scraped up, move them to our prep table. And then lamb side number 1 is ready for the beef or the lamb diagram. And then we'll get on to lamb side number 2. Scott has this half almost finished, but one thing I do want to add is the little lamb riblets. So these are just those, what's left from when I did that French rack. And we're just going to add these to our little stash. So some nice little lamb riblets. I think Scott's ready to go to the table.
Start with the front shank. We're going to build a lamb. The front shake. Neck slices.
I only gave you half of the neck slices, Scott, because I kept the other half for the next side, so just so you know.
Chuck. Got my little arm. Everything on lamb is just so little and cute. French rack. Got my little riblets here. I've got my loin. Do my loin chops. And I got my little sirloin, a leg, and last, another little shank. Meat and spices have gone together for centuries, and for over a decade, the Bearded Butchers have been formulating, blending spices that we started out using in our butcher shop, and now we've offered them for sale. 11 different unique blends and 2 sauces. We sell it in both shaker size and in large 4-pound bag sizes. We know that these spices are going to be great for not just meats, but for anything that you can think to put them around your household. So please go to www.beardedbutchers.com, check out our offerings. We're also into many of your retailers nationwide, so look for the Bearded Butcher blend spices on a store shelf near you.
Lamb side number 2. So I did split those neck slices in half because I wanted to save half of them for this side. I want to start with the leg again, just like we did on the other half. So leg of lamb, let's just go down through each section. But we're going to do it with a little bit of a twist because we're going to do a little bit different. Lamb sirloin. Sirloins are pretty much the same as they were on the last half. This is how we merchandise them, so just cut those the same. Just do a little bit of trimming. So there's your lamb sirloins. I would like to mention that when we get to the boning table and we start trimming out the meat for ground lamb, then we'll be adding the trimmings to our table, that we will be cutting some stew meat as well. So here, just do like I did on the last one. Remove that lamb shank. Now what I want to do is something just a little bit different. I want to make this one boneless. And we're going to roll and tie it. So we start by just removing this H-bone out of here. Once we get the H-bone out, we're going to pull the femur out. So let's get the femur out of there. There is a gland right here. I want to get this gland out. I want to leave that in our roast. You can see it right there. Is that gland? So get that out of there. Now what I want to do is I want to roll and tie this. Okay, so we made the leg boneless. Now we want to roll and tie it. So we just put our fancy little butcher knot on there. So this just gives you a couple different options between what I did on the last half by leaving the bone in it versus this one by removing the bone. So we'll just go down through here and put a few of these strings on there. Just holds everything together during the packaging process and when you go to cook it. See that little tricks of the trade I did there? Put that small little cut in that meat, and then your string falls into place and it holds your string in place. So one of the little tricks of the trade. So there you have a nice boneless rolled and tied leg of lamb. Take that little hock off there like I did the last one. Next step is that other front shoulder. Let's get that front shank. So there you have the hind shank and front shank. Now we want to cut some shoulder chops. This is going to be the arm chop. Just like that. Now we want to cut some blade chops. So I cut them this direction. Now I want to spin it and cut them this direction for those nice shoulder blade chops. So the last half I did a roast. And this half we're doing chops. So a couple of the arm style and then those blade style chops. All right, we have that one loin and rib section left. We want to do pretty similar to the last half. So count over 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're going to French this again, but the difference is we're going to cut it into chops this time. These will be the same as the last half, so these are just your lamb loin chops. Go in for those riblets again like we did the last half. So there's the lamb riblets. Now let's get started on this French rack, but something we're going to do a little bit different is we're going to make these into chops. So the other one we left whole. This one we're going to cut. Start by getting that membrane off of there. Pretty much the same process leading up to actually cutting each individual chop. So we start with the French rack and then just cut them up. So same process here. Moving the fat off the back of these. Move that little bone. down in between each rib. Now we just take that meat out like we did on the other one. Some places you might see this meat left on these ribs. It just depends on the style and preference of probably whoever cut them or the requests of the customer. But once we get that done, we'll go down through after we get these cut and trim them up just a little bit more. But now what we can do, a little bit more of that yellow cord on there. Now what we can do is we can grab our 8-inch knife and we can just go down through each individual, there we go, bone, and cut these into Frenched rib chops. You're kind of at the mercy of the lamb with the thickness of these. So there you have some French lamb chops, and we can go down through here and clean these up a little bit more. Yes, the only real difference that we did here is we cut these into individual little chops. We didn't leave it whole like the last half. So now, same as we did the other half, is we're just going to start moving everything over here. Scott's going to do some scraping, and then we'll lay everything out for side number 2.
Side 2 starts with a leg. We got a couple more neck slices. We got our shoulder. Got our blade cuts. We got our French chops. Time for some riblets. Then my loin. Leg of lamb, boneless and rolled and tied. And then the last lamb shank.
The lamb diagram, you see it on the table. Both halves cut just slightly different. Now that portion's done, Scott and we're going to move over to our boning table. We have a couple lugs with some trimmings off of each of these halves. We're going to go through them. We're going to trim them out, trim out the trimmings, and then we're also going to cut some stew meat. We're going to save the bones, and then we'll get all that added back to our table. So Scott and we got to get some boning done. So as we're going down through this trim, we're going to save these little pieces like this, these cubes, and that'll be our lamb stew meat that we'll add to our table as well. But yeah, we're just going to work down through this, separating the fat and bone, making some nice trim that'll be ground lamb, and then we'll get it all added to our table. Okay, so we got everything trimmed out. We have, we kept each half separate. So we have a pile of trimmings for each half, and then we have the bones, the fat, the stew meat from each half. So we want to go ahead and fill in our empty spaces and start by putting some stew on this for this half. And the stew meat, you have to keep in mind, came from various parts of the animal, but we're going to put it right in this flank area. So nice pile of stew meat, and then we'll get the trim and the fat and bones added to our pile. Lamb diagram, you see it on the table. 2 different halves, all of the cuts, the trim, the fat, the bones, it's all here. Let's do a quick overview. First half, we have a couple of the neck slices. We have a lamb shank, arm roast. That's a blade roast, French rack, some riblets, loin chops, some sirloin, some stew meat, bone-in leg of lamb, and the hind shank. So that's the first half. The second half, we have the neck slices, we have arm chops, the shoulder chops, we have a front shank, we have the blade shoulder chops, French chops, lamb riblets, loin chops, sirloin, stew meat, boneless rolled and tied leg of lamb, and then that hind shank. And then moving on, we have the fat, the trimmings, and the bones for each half. Pretty cool overview, isn't it, Scott?
Great job. So
Thanks.
At this point, we're going to go ahead, pack everything up. We're going to weigh it. We're going to answer some questions to the end, what our yield was, so we can help drill in what we actually got off of this lamb. So only thing left to do, throw it in some packages, get some weights on it, let you know.
So for a visual overview, if you're a visual learner, we think this is fantastic because you get to see the outline and you get to see everything is placed inside that outline. So hopefully you can be better educated when you go to your meat counter or your butcher shop, or you go to give those cutting instructions on how you want something processed or what lamb you want to cook.
Okay, so here are your weights. The lamb started out weighing 62 pounds. That was the carcass hot hanging weight. That's when it went into the cooler off the kill floor. We weighed up our cuts. The entirety of our cuts makes up a total of 39.07 pounds. Then we have our trim. That's 50.07, or excuse me, this trim's 11 pounds. So that's 50.07 pounds altogether of what we consider yield, or carcass yield. So from the animal being a carcass into a cutout, these being the tangible cuts and the trim, basically the stuff that you can eat. Now, of course, the cuts have some bone in them. That's great. It's about 80% of the carcass weight as a packaged product. This will be made in a ground lamb. And then, of course, we have our fat and our bone. Our fat totaled 4.15 pounds, our bone 5.25 pounds. So in totality, we have 59.5 pounds of the carcass right here in front of us. Now, 59.5, we started with 62. However, we have the evaporation loss. This lamb was butchered on a Wednesday, and it was a week later on a Wednesday that we did the processing. So some of that moisture evaporated out of the carcass. We were left with about a 4% evaporation loss. So there are your numbers. 62, evaporation loss brought it down to 59.5. That breaks down into cuts, which total, including the trim, 50.07 pounds of yield from the carcass start weight, then your fat, then your bones. There's a look at it. It's a pretty fantastic yield from this lamb at 80%. There you go. So you saw it weighed. Hope you enjoyed the video. Looks beautiful, Seth. Want to say a special thank you to Bill and Linda Simmons, which is Alyssa's grandparents. Local lamb. This lamb was 120 days old, so 4-month-old lamb. Looks beautiful, turned out beautiful. What do you think, Seth?
Another fun one. We hope you guys enjoy the series that we're doing on the diagrams. We did the beef diagram. Lamb was next. We have some more coming down the road. We're gonna do venison, we're gonna do pork, we're gonna probably do an elk, and if there's a species out there that we can put into a diagram, we're gonna cut it and we're gonna do it. So in the meantime, if you see any of these pop up on the internet that isn't us, I'd say that they're just ripping off our idea. But anyways, hopefully you enjoyed it. Another fun one, and until next time, see ya.